All right, welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scope, Jared Mack on the show as well. And today we are continuing the first ever tradition here for the man Josh Pate of Late Kick of 24/7 Sports. He was in Eugene, so we felt like, hey, first time in Eugene, we needed to have you make your first time appearance on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Josh, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so beaten down by travel. Look at my face. You can't see it. I just protested turning the camera on, but it was really fun out there, man. It was a scene. I know you guys expected it, but I was talking to some folks in the airport. I think a lot of folks saw Oregon in week 1 and they saw what happened against Georgia. And to me, and I think the numbers will bear this out, this is the first time most of the country saw Oregon since week 1. And I can't imagine a bigger shock to the senses after 49-3 than seeing what they just did to UCLA. Those don't even look like the same players. It doesn't look like the same team. And yet, you guys have been on the ground every day since then. So it probably wasn't a massive shock to you guys like it was to a lot of the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I was the only one to predict a double-digit win, but I think Jared picked a cover. Eric was close to a cover. It was almost a push for the final line. But you're right. Like, the national perspective of Oregon probably was, oh, my God, who are these guys? This is not the team that we saw. And I think that's a credit to Dan Lanning and the staff to get this team kind of headed in the right direction from week 1. But we'll get to – we just lost Josh. Don't know where Josh went. Josh disappeared. We'll see if he comes back, because we were going to ask questions about just his experience at Oregon. And he's back. All right, there we go. Josh, before we dive into the game, I want to get your perspective just on your overall experience, because I watched your Late Kick show Sunday night. If you're not a listener or a watcher of that show on this podcast, you need to be. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's free. Go subscribe to the podcast channel of that. It's free. You had something that I said I thought was perfect. You said, close your eyes if you're down near the field and just listen to the crowd, and you won't realize that you're in a stadium of 60,000. You'll think you're in a stadium of I think 90,000. But just, what was your overall experience like of Oregon? Because there's a lot of hype to this place in Eugene, and when you come, you picked a really good time to see it at its peak.
Yeah. So to give the listeners or viewers who don't know an idea of what we do, we pick a game and we go to it every week. So we have full control over where we go. So I'm always at a big game. We're always at your stadium whenever your crowd is fully jacked. I say that because I've seen all these stadiums at not only peak capacity, but, peak energy. So I think I have a really good idea, stadium to stadium, how things match up. And a lot of times I've noticed people get really hung up on capacity numbers. And in the South, where I live and where I grew up, a lot of people would look at Oregon, even when they hear things said positively about Autzen Stadium, and even if they've seen it on TV, they would say, well, how loud can 59 or 60,000 people really be? We've got 90, we've got 95, we got 100. So when I go out there for the first time, like I did this past weekend, what I value is the overall environment. It doesn't matter if you've got 5 people or 5 million people. What can you create? And so the best gauge for that to me is to just close your eyes. Because really, we're talking about creating a sound effect that will impact the opposing team. A capacity number doesn't do that. And we're talking about creating an environment that impresses potential recruits. And a capacity number doesn't do that. An actual experience and environment does. So you might as well close your eyes. You don't need the visual sense in that frame of reference to gauge that. And when you close your eyes, it sounds just like Auburn or Gainesville or South Carolina. It sounds like one of those places in the South. It sounds like Columbus, Ohio. It sounds like places that you go where the capacity number is a whole lot bigger. And the other thing about it is I think that a lot of credit is due. I know you guys are more used to it out there because of the time difference. In the South and out East, it's just like a built-in excuse. If you have a 12 or 12:30 local time kickoff, there's just a built-in excuse. It's going to be a little somber here today, or it's going to be a little muted, and that's why. Well, you don't get to use that excuse out west, obviously, and you deal with those early kickoffs a whole lot more. But it was a 12:30 kickoff out there. Place was primed. I think UCLA. How many false starts did they have? I mean, it was a factor all day, and I thought that it was a big testament to the crowd out there. I thought they delivered. They had obviously a big unofficial visit weekend. I don't know how many officials they had, but it was a huge impact. I loved it, and I kind of expected it, but it was nice to get all of my suspicions validated.
Josh, you just talked about kind of a fresh experience at Autzen, and I know we chatted up in the Autzen press box. Good meeting you in person for the first time, by the way. And one of the things you talked about was how you had kind of an extended opportunity to speak with Dan Lanning. You met him in the past briefly before, but you had a decent amount of time with him. We've had a good amount of time with him. We kind of know him decently. What were your impressions of him in that experience, and maybe also just how that carry over to the game where he did make some pretty big kind of, I would say, aggressive calls that I think ended up bearing out for Oregon?
Yeah. I was there Friday night and got shown around the place and was in Dan's office for a little while. Had a really good conversation with him. They were ready to do that. I mean, that was not something that was decided spur of the moment. I can tell you that. That was part of their game plan going in. And they basically twofold. They looked at it as, if we can be aggressive tactically, we know we've got the personnel to carry out an aggressive game plan on the field. But also at the same time, when you think aggressive, you think a lot of throwing the ball deep. You think a lot of trickeration. You think a lot of, well, let's fake it and go for it on fourth down. And they did the onside kick, so there was that. But to me, when you can marry that conceptually with that, it seemed like a 50-play drive to start the third quarter, and you do it with the run-pass ratio that they did, and it goes really old school. And so you're marrying this advanced, more analytical and aggressive style with a 1930s style when you want to pull it out of your bag. That's versatility. It's multiplicity. And, I was talking to a lot of the folks around the facility. I was watching it myself. When they talk about what they want to become, I think the UCLA game is a great peek into the window of what they want to become. They don't want to be able to put one thing in one sentence on one piece of paper, and okay, if we can cross off that one thing Oregon does, we got them. Because there are teams out there like that. Alabama just showed you against Mississippi State. If you take away one thing Mike Leach does, it's the crowbar and the bicycle spokes. They're done. Well, Oregon now has more than just one thing. And all of a sudden, like I said at the beginning, if people watch them for the first time since week one, all of a sudden they look like a team that you have to really take seriously. They're the favorite to win the Pac-12 now, odds-wise, but also you just never know what can happen down the road. Not that they're worried about that internally, but I'm sitting here thinking that externally. And I'm also thinking about, how many exciting things are to come. I think everyone expects a wide open transfer portal window. I mean, every coach I talk to says the same thing. There is going to be a wide open transfer portal window coming up. So anytime you're seeing a program do big things right now, think about it on the field, but then also think about it in recruiting. But then thirdly, think about what you're selling to kids that are already at other programs who may be on the market, some of whom you don't even expect to be on the market.
Josh, just want to say thank you for coming on the program. Great to meet you this weekend at Autzen. You on Late Kick Live on your Sunday show, you talked about how there were highs and lows of the new hires of this college football season, but you thought that Oregon nailed it. What on Saturday, either at the game or talking to Dan or in the facilities with all the coaching staff, what solidified that idea from you that you think that Oregon has nailed this hire so far?
Well, I think the pieces on the staff fit very well together. You can call that synergy if you want to. I just think that sometimes, especially for a new head coach who has not put together his own staff before, sometimes they go hire names, but there's never consideration to how those names fit together. Your coaching staff in a perfect world should look like a finished puzzle, and every piece fits with the next piece. That's not always the case. That sounds so easy and simplistic. That's not always the case. In fact, most of the time it's not. That's why most teams don't win at a high level. But at the same time, I don't want to overlook this. Just think back to this last weekend, guys. It's one thing to say, oh, Oregon was favored, Oregon won, move on. Chip Kelly's been doing this a long time. Dan Lanning has not. And they sort of outcoached UCLA Saturday. And that's not something that you should just mention and then pass over, because you've got a rookie head coach up there. And that, I think, is a testament not just to him. He would be the first probably to tell you, oh, that's my staff. That's the players, but that's the staff. Well, it's the staff he put together. It's the players being put in the position that his plan dictates they get put in. So Dan Lanning does deserve a lot of credit, but that staff deserves a lot of credit too. And they got some grinders on that staff. And they got folks who have been at a few places. They've seen it done a few different ways. And the excitement there is, okay, let's take bits and pieces of that, but now we get to do it our way. Early returns are their way works. We're not nearly deep enough in to give a final grade or anything like that, but you got to be encouraged. And all the while, you're just scratching the surface of what Oregon could be.
Josh, I want to talk a little bit about the Bo Nix of it all. And you've seen him a lot more probably than we have, especially from a prior Oregon perspective. And I know you talked about it on your show Sunday, and I don't want to reiterate the same talking points, but what did maybe we all out west get wrong? Because there was a lot of, I think, skepticism about what Bo could be out here. Obviously, he has put a lot of those questions to rest, especially, I would say, the last 3 or 4 games once they've gotten to conference play. What did we get wrong? And has anything he's done really surprised you since he's been out here?
Yeah, it has surprised me, but it hasn't surprised me in terms of his skill set. Skill set's always been there. I looked at him when he went to Auburn, and that was when Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma. And I just kind of thought, if he were to go to Oklahoma, he's got a skill set that would land him in the first round of the NFL draft, because Lincoln Riley would have developed him. He would have been put in position with great wide receivers around him, and he would have flourished there. But that's not where he went. He went to Auburn. His dad played at Auburn. Everyone knows that story. Auburn under Gus Malzahn never developed a quarterback in-house. The only time they had success was when they took guys from the portal. Or, well, I guess what we call the portal now. But they took transfers, and that's how he won. Jarrett Stidham, transfer. They had a year in 2013 where they had a transfer from DB that they put at quarterback. Well, Nix came in there, and that was the big talking point when he committed out of high school. Is he going to be able to be developed there? He was not. And he had a very poor offensive line, and he had no wide receivers, and he was like one of those shelter animals. We used to get him all the time when I was a kid, and we would go buy the puppies, and my mom would tell me, you can't be around this dog for a little while. It's scared of people. And there was a good reason for that. Well, when Bo Nix transferred, he wasn't transferring as a one-year player. Here was my concern. My concern was, this is so ingrained in him. There's no reversing. There's no untangling this knot. It's going to take too long. And so when I was in the facility Friday night, I was talking to some of their staff at Oregon, and they said, it really wasn't that. All we had to get him to do is just don't run backwards every play, because that's what's on film. That's what he does. He sees ghosts from Auburn. And I understand why. I mean, he was under constant duress. He was under assault down there. Well, that's not the case now. You can protect him. He's got weapons around him. He can dump the ball off. It's not him versus the world. And now that you've gotten that out of his system, and now you've got the ability to develop him, you got an offensive coordinator who knows him, and most importantly, you got players around him. That's what Bo Nix was always capable of. So this is not a revelation in terms of his skill set. It's a new day in terms of him actually fulfilling that potential. He just put himself so far behind the 8 ball early in his career at Auburn that it took until now to see it.
Josh, there's so many great things that came out of Oregon's victory over UCLA and the atmosphere of the game itself, how Oregon has bounced back from that week 1 Georgia loss. I want to pick your brain about what do you think some of the concerns are for this team going forward, and more so as the team, and then potentially down the line with the staff or something in that manner.
Well, UCLA didn't punt Saturday. So if I were to tell you that Friday, I think you would have. Yeah. I think everyone on this show would have banked on the fact that you just whiffed on your prediction. I would be among you. So all 4 of us would be feeling that. And yet Oregon still found a way to win and win comfortably. But at the same time, they're not a finished product defensively. And I think Dan Lanning knows that. I mean, he didn't even let people finish their question hardly in the postgame presser before he said essentially that. I'm interested moving forward. You got who you have this year, but I'm interested moving forward. What kind of what kind of athlete and what kind of depth, let me say it like this, what kind of depth and versatility through recruiting they can manage to develop in their defensive front. Because in a perfect world, you can be multiple there. And in a perfect world, you've got the kind of body types and skill sets that transition where you can face wide open offenses one week and a really, really physical box team the next week. And that's not always been the case out west. It's hard enough to do that when you recruit in the South. And so it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. But at the same time, a lot of the excitement around there, as I said, is born in recruiting and believing in their vision, but also the portal world is a different world. You can get players in the portal or out of the portal, I guess, using different techniques than in high school. In high school, some of the dumbest stuff in the world matters. It's just the way of the world. I mean, there's a reason why that throne sits in their equipment room. It's not because that makes you a better player. It's just because that's what impresses a high school kid, and it's dumb, but you do it. Well, when guys have already been on campus a year or two, that stuff's kind of filtered out. They're down to business. And so if they're going to be on the move, they're caring about the right things at that point. And I think Oregon's got the right things. And so when I'm telling you, I wonder what kind of depth and versatility they can build in different position groups, I'm sort of thinking about the portal and thinking about which kind of players they can add in that avenue. I think it's going to be the big story. No one's talking about it right now because we're in the season, but I think it's going to be the big story come December and January. And I think Oregon's going to be a player there. And by the way, I think you guys have probably already done this, but you could do a little exercise where you look at the few they brought in, and they're virtually all contributing, and you can look at some of the ones who left. And we're far enough in the season right now where you can say I think some guys made some very poor decisions. It is what it is. It's their choice. But there are some guys who could be contributing on this team that weren't character concerns or anything. They just got out of Dodge because they didn't know what the future held. And it's sort of two sides to that portal coin.
All right, Josh, we'll end it with this and get you out of here. Big picture perspective of just Oregon for the rest of this season. They're in this weird position where if they run the table, they're going to be favored in every game on their schedule. All their tough games are at home. Washington at home, Utah at home. Their toughest road game is probably Oregon State, which should be a challenge. It's a rivalry game, but Oregon on paper is just drastically better than the Beavers. Get to the Pac-12 championship game. Maybe they face USC. Maybe it's a rematch against UCLA. They should be favored in that game, I think. If they win out and they're 12-1 and they're Pac-12 champions, that's hard to say. You don't know what happened week one, that they should make the playoff. But when you look at week one, I have a hard time saying they should make the playoff when you get drubbed 49-3. I think this is going to be a fascinating exercise if Oregon runs the table to how the playoff committee handles this team, because they're 12-1, but the one loss that they lost, the game that they lost, they got embarrassed, and that's hard to put into the playoff.
It's hard. It's not impossible. To me, I can look at it this way because I'm not sitting out there as an Oregon fan. I can tell you I think it's going to be a winning scenario regardless. If you make the playoff, you make the playoff. That's descriptive enough. If you barely miss out on the playoff, it just provides fuel for next year, and you let guys know you got to take it serious from the opening gun. You can't. This is not preseason. You can't afford to give away any games early. Also, if they falter down the stretch, you've got the teaching point of you got really, really high off of folks telling you how good you were. You can't be patting yourself on the back. You got to finish the drill. So whatever happens here, it's going to be able to turn into a positive for Dan Lanning and his staff. But what they need to root for, and I think if you want to make the playoff, obviously you're rooting for Georgia. It would greatly help your cause if the team you got blown out by was the number one seed. I think they need USC to be in that Pac-12 championship game, because if they're playing someone there, you need someone the committee respects and thinks highly of, and it doesn't matter what's under the USC helmet. If you put that helmet on the field, you'll get the committee's respect. And then number three, you mentioned Washington, you mentioned Utah. Those are two more high-profile opportunities, and I think of the Oregon State game as high-profile. I don't know how much the rest of the country feels that way, but you guys have watched them. You know they're a good football team. They've got opportunities. So it's not like you just saw them and now they're going to coast off the radar, and the next time you see them is Conference Championship Friday. So they're going to be there. It's the same way with Clemson right now. It's the same way with a lot of these teams. You just wait. You got to see how everything shakes out. And that's out of your hands if you're Oregon. But if you just control what you can control, they're going to be in a good position regardless.
Josh, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully we see you back in Eugene at some point, maybe next season. I don't know. Maybe you can make a surprise trip to Utah. I don't know, but I don't want to put that pressure on it. But hey, I hope to see you back in Eugene. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it, guys, and I appreciate everyone out there. We got treated great this week. It felt like we were home, and we were 3,000 miles away from home. So big thanks to everyone in Eugene.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thanks for Josh Pate for coming on the show, talking it up with us three fellas here. And make sure to subscribe to his YouTube page, Late Kick 24/7 Sports. Also subscribe to the podcast as well. Very informative, very in tune person right there. Good human being, Josh Pate. All right, guys, let's flip the script. Mailbag time. We're still going to do the mailbag. We've got a couple questions, and it was very hard to find some questions that we wanted to use, not because of the scarcity of questions, but because we had a lot to divulge from.
We had a lot to pick from, which is great. It means there's interest. The show is flourishing. We're messaging on Sunday morning, right when I kind of woke up, looking at the numbers from the pod we put up the night before, and we were kind of like, holy, which word do I say here? Holy cow, I guess, is what I think I'm saying now, but maybe I used a different word in the Slack channel, just because the numbers were really, really encouraging. A lot of people were, I think, excited, fired up about this one, as they should be. So we got, I think, a good selection of questions. Again, fun to see some new names on the show here. We're going to do 3 here on the back half. I know usually we do 5, but maybe we'll get a couple extra a week from now. We just thought, hey, we're going to get Josh Pate on the show. We want to give the guy a good full segment. So first one from @FishEcon, #Autzen Audibles. To what degree is the outstanding production of the offensive line a legacy of the previous staff? And is this a level that the Ducks can reasonably hope to achieve in future seasons? I thought this was a good place to start because the offensive line is performing, I would argue, better than any offensive line I can think of at Oregon in a very long time in terms of just the totality of what they're accomplishing on the field. I'm not saying it has the same top-tier talent. We've been over this. There's no Penny on this line. But you've got 5 guys that are working and playing at a very, very high level. There are still the, pre-snap issues every now and then. Matt and I kind of talking at the game of like, it seems like Forsyth has something wrong happen with a pre-snap, kind of a snap issue almost every week now, which is a little bit concerning, but I don't think that concerning. And I think once the ball is snapped, they win basically every down. They hardly ever give up any pressures. They provide massive run lanes for whoever is carrying the football. And it's a group I think you feel very, very comfortable with. So to the first question about the legacy of the previous staff, I think you have to give a lot of credit to Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal for this. Obviously, we'll get to some, Adrian Clem's done a fantastic job. This group is playing better than it did under those two, I think, notably. That could be seasoning of the experience. It could be, I know in the spring and in the fall, they talked about there was a lot of technical changes in terms of the aggression here. They are more aggressive right now than they were under the previous staff in terms of stepping towards the defensive players as opposed to stepping back on pass downs, some different things with the handwork. I'm not an offensive line guru by any means, but there were some really instructive comments made by both Ryan Walk, Alex Forsyth, I think even TJ Bass, kind of about some of the actual technical changes of what they're doing. I think that gets overlooked in offensive line play, and I'm the wrong person to try to break it all down. I'm sure Jeff Schwartz, if we ever got him as a guest, would be that could be very informative of what are they actually doing differently? Because they made it very clear there was a lot they're doing differently. So Clem deserves a lot of credit for some of that stuff, but I think you have to give a lot of credit to the previous staff for recruiting this group, for buying in with this group, and for the development that they had, even if it was different in terms of kind of the system that they were operating under, because this is a group that has been together now for about 3 full seasons, and it shows. And I think you can legitimately argue this is undoubtedly the best group in the Pac-12. I think the stats bear it out. And I think you can look at the country here, and I'm not saying same top-tier talent, but just a group that's performing within an offense. It is meeting expectations and is up there, I think, nationally. And I don't know if there's going to be any All-Americans on this team, but this is a group that to me feels like should have, I think, national consideration in terms of just kind of being one of the best units in the country. I know you listen to some of the national podcasts. They're taking notice. I know Bruce Feldman shouted this group out on the Audible podcast a couple of days ago that I was listening to, and so on and so forth. So there's kind of my answer to the legacy part. I'll let you guys answer the second question about kind of future achievement.
Sure. I think this is sustainable. I think you mentioned how Adrian Clem has done a good job, and he's taken these players who Mario Cristobal left. And to briefly answer the first one, I think a lot of it does have to go, or the first question, a lot of it does have to go to Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, two of the best offensive line guys probably in the country. You look at like Brian Walk and Alex Forsyth, and their ability to find these guys like TJ Bass. I know he was pretty highly rated as a JUCO recruit, and then Sala was, I think, the best, if not the second best JUCO recruit in the country. They just had an eye for this, and they would like Feope Laulu. I think would be a good player if he started for Oregon. I think they'd be okay. They've done a good job developing talent, but I think overall that can continue with Adrian Clem. I think that his NFL experience is extremely undervalued, especially at the offensive line position. His new techniques, and like Eric said, I can't tell you what exactly they mean or what exactly they are or how exactly they help. Another part in this, and maybe we'll get to this question later in the podcast, but this offense provides an opportunity for Oregon's offensive line to show their strength, but also not really put a lot of pressure on them, because they're able to do a lot of quick throws and a lot of throws behind the line and bubble screens and stuff like that, where it's not about holding up against a pass rush like UCLA that often. They do it, and they do it well, absolutely. But in a hypothetical world, if this wasn't as great of an offensive line, I still think the sack numbers would be relatively low just because of how they play. And I'm not saying this is a detriment to the offense or anything like that. I'm saying it's good offensive play calling by Kenny Dillingham, where he's able to get his guys, his athletic offensive linemen, in the open field and protect the quarterback and not let him just sit back in the pocket. Eric, you were talking about comparing this offensive line to former offensive lines. I still think the 2019 one was probably a higher ceiling, but the offense then was more stagnant. They weren't getting guys in motion. They weren't using players. There were opportunities for a defensive line to just go right at them and go and attack Justin Herbert, unlike how they used Bo Nix in this offensive line. So I think for future value, I think it can absolutely maintain maybe not this level of talent and this elite offensive line play, because it's really hard to do that on a given year and especially even consistently. But I think the offensive line should and could remain a huge strength of Oregon's overall offense and one of the better groups on the team.
I think the answer to these questions are probably both. You have to credit Mario Cristobal and Mirabal for the talent acquisition of the players on hand, but you have to credit Adrian Clem, the offensive line coach currently, and Kenny Dillingham, the offensive coordinator, for maybe putting this talent in better places to succeed, because Oregon's 2022 offense, their yards per carry ranks second in the country. Mario Cristobal never had a top 10 offense that had, that fit into that top 10. But last season, they were 13th in the country in yards per carry. The last time Oregon was in the top 10 was in 2015, which was under Mark Helfrich. And the last time that Oregon had an offense that was ranked higher came in 2012 when they led the country under Chip Kelly with 5.97 yards per carry. I agree with Jared that the 2019 offensive line is probably better than this one, but they weren't maximizing the efficiency of that unit. 38th in the country, 4.8 yards per carry. So I think some of the offense matters here, but they're running. I think The talent matters here. I think some fine-tuning matters here. And to answer the second part of the question, the longevity of this, I think we've seen that this staff can recruit offensive linemen, getting Josh Connerly, getting Dave Ewley last class. Connerly plays this season. You know Jackson Powers-Johnson will be here next year. He's a big piece of this team. We know Marcus Harper will be here. He's a big piece of this team currently. Stephen Jones has an opportunity to come back. And while we don't want to speak for his future, if he has aspirations of making it to the NFL, probably should come back based off of that. So the pieces are going to be in place, at least short-term wise, for this to continue. And as recruiting shows, it should only get better or should only maintain the level of talent that they have. And I think the offense that they run plays into this as well. So as long as they're running a modern day version of college football's offense, and as long as the recruiting continues to go as we've seen it, I think it's fair to say that this offensive line should continue to be pretty darn good. Is it fair to say, hey, they should be second in the country every single year in yards per carry or rushing yards? No. Or pass protection? No. But I think it's a reasonable expectation to say every single season this unit should be one of the best 25 units in the country, whether it's pass protection, run blocking, and combined. And I think on the low end, you're in the 20 range. And on the high end, you're probably in the top 10.
Yeah, I think important distinction there at the end, Matt, that you've made, that I was going to just kind of conclude this conversation of, future seasons. I don't want to set the expectation that next year's offensive line, which could lose 4 starters, and 5 quasi with Stephen Jones if he were to, because he could leave as well. I think I consider Harper now to be somebody who has starting experience. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson is basically a pseudo starter. He played a lot this last game. He's played a lot most of the games this season. I bet he's played 20, 25 snaps basically every week. And he's in that 14J package every time. They take Ryan Walk out for that. So my point remains that, like, I think a big part of this group is the seasoning, is the experience, is the Alex Forsyth. I mentioned some of the snap stuff. I think he is ultra important to everything that's going on up front. It's going to be difficult to replace him. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson eventually will be somebody who can play at a similar level, but it won't be year one. So I think the groundwork is laid. The offense is, as Jared and you both, I think, outlined pretty well, is favorable to offensive line play. You've got a head coach that and an offensive coordinator that really understand kind of the cohesion required for an offense and kind of playing to strengths. And I think they'll continue to do that. But I do think you have to expect at least somewhat of a dip next year. You lose a lot of good players, a lot of players that have played a lot of snaps. And so to expect it to remain one of the best, whatever you want to call it, 6 units, 8 units, I don't know. I'd have to actually go and rank the units to be able to actually say where they fit in. But whatever you want to call it, a great unit, I think you should expect it to take a step down a bit next year just because of what you're losing. But the baseline should be that this is a great offensive line team year in and year out. And some of that's going to depend upon continued talent acquisition, which at least through the first recruiting class last year, getting Connerly, is off to a really good start. All right. Next one from @DonovanJM, #Autzen Audibles. Talk to me about 3rd and 4th down defense. Is it as bad as it seems? It's really frustrating me. I think this question from Donovan is probably echoing what a lot of Oregon fans are feeling right now. I'm doing my game grades, just kind of started doing those right before we got on here. I'm going to give a lot of really favorable offensive grades. Some of the defensive grades won't be very favorable because they just have a really hard time consistently getting off the field. I actually thought they were decent on 3rd down for the most part against UCLA. I mean, 6 of 12 isn't great, but they did force a couple field goals. But UCLA never had a drive end in their, before the 50-yard line. They were never able to get off the field there. And as Dan said, it was a sort of a frustrating circumstance of even when they did win on some of those 3rd downs, not winning on 4th. And UCLA's ability to convert several of those on short intermediate routes. And you have to acknowledge some wins again. There was some positive play, but I do think it's probably the biggest concern this is a broad and an obvious point. The biggest concern with this team right now is defense. and no one would suggest otherwise. And I think more narrowly, I do feel like third down defense concerns me right now. Oregon gives up a lot of sustained scoring drives. It's better when you're able to hold them to field goals like they did against UCLA, but it's definitely not good enough. And to me, it comes down to all three units, really. UCLA is a bit of a outlier, I think, because they were able to run the ball really effectively. They have Zach Charbonnet. They have a good offensive line that set them up in a lot of third and manageables. When you get into third down and 6 and 7, I get nervous because a lot of the passes are into areas where you've got linebackers in coverage. And we've talked about this. I know it's interesting reading message boards where people think the defensive problems are kind of stemmed from. I'm still big on Oregon's pretty good up front. I actually think their secondary's playing.
It's actually played really well.
The last month or so. Oregon's linebackers are a problem. They're not very good and haven't been playing very good, especially on pass downs. You think about the first UCLA touchdown, Justin Flo just a step slow to react and then a step slow to get there. Noah Sewell is also typically a step slow. The Jake Bobo touchdown at the end there, I don't think that's entirely Sewell's fault because he's kind of coming over from a zone trying to play help defense of knocking it down. But that's still a play. If he makes it, there's no score there. I just think that's a real issue. And I think you want to couple that with a little better pass rush of making those throws more difficult. But DTR had a lot of time, and he had the ability to pick and choose where he threw the football. And I thought Oregon's corners played pretty admirably in terms of contesting the ball. I thought Brian Addison played really, really well on rewatch. He made a ton of plays. I didn't think that Oregon's linebackers played very well. And so not to continue to beat that dead horse, but to me, a lot of the issues on all 3 downs, 4 downs if a team goes for it are linebacker related. And you just kind of hope, again, we talked about the importance of these next 2 weeks of kind of shoring up weaknesses. You hope these are games where you're able to get a little bit better play from these guys in the middle there. Because I just am continued to feel like that's sort of the weak spot, which again is surprising, but probably maybe shouldn't be considering some of the health stuff you're dealing with as well.
Yeah. To answer Donovan JM's question, is it as bad as it seems? The answer is yes. They're 129th in the country out of 131 programs for third down conversion percentage as a defense. They're allowing 50.5%. So obviously 1 and 2, which is not good compared to Ohio State ranks second, and they're allowing third down conversions at a 24.5% rate, 1 and 4. So pretty simple arithmetic, which is all we can do on this program, that's for sure. But it's the linebackers. You watch that game against UCLA, and like Eric and I were literally just talking about, the secondary, I thought, played pretty well. When Dorian Thompson-Robinson took a shot down the field, anything over 10 to 15 yards, there was usually a guy there, or at least a man in coverage, and a quick tackle that was wrapped up. There was the one play that Eric mentioned, the Flo touchdown. That was the longest play of the game through the air, and it was a 3-yard pass. It was just someone being faster than the other person. The longest pass play was the Jake Bobo one for 28 yards, and that was just a tremendous catch. There's a much higher possibility of him dropping that than making a catch. So I think defensively, it's the linebackers in space and moving east to west. I know whoever's been listening to this podcast for the last month, 2 months at this point, is probably really frustrated with how often I say east to west, but those are the problems. If you look at UCLA's conversions on Saturday, 1 for 3 on third and long, and they considered long being 9+ yards, but they're 4 for 4 on third and short, so under 4 yards. That makes sense. I mean, again, this is under 4 yards is something you can run for, and they have one of the best running backs in the conference and a very good offensive line. So that's another issue that Oregon had to deal with. But when UCLA needed 6 to 7 yards on a third down, it was just right where the linebackers are. It was either moving them east to west or finding a hole in the zone coverage that they were playing. Chip Kelly did a really good job of taking advantage of Oregon's linebacking abilities and their coverage abilities as well. It's just not there. And I think Dan and then the defense have improved on it, I would say, because it was really porous to start the season. But it's a well-known commodity that this is an issue. But thankfully for Oregon, the secondary and the safeties and the cornerbacks have really stepped up their game to the point where teams can really only go underneath. This third down issue is becoming a bit of a problem here at Oregon for the last 2 years. I think we all remember how if any team last season in 2021, if they had a 3rd and 7 or longer, boom, slant route. That's all you needed to do against Tim DeRuyter's defense last year with their linebacking coverage. And those are beginning to be the same problems in this season, or are continuing to be problems in this season. Not as many slant routes, which is nice, but again, a lot of teams just going right at the linebackers on 3rd and long.
Two things. I agree that it's a concern, but since I'll play the maybe half glass full type role to this answer, the offenses that they've faced are pretty damn good. You look at the schedule, the teams that they've played, you then go and you look at the yards per play from an offensive perspective. Teams that are the most efficient per play on offense. They've played number 4 in the country, Georgia. They've played number 8 in the country, UCLA. They've played number 25 in the country, BYU. And they've played number 26 in the country, Arizona. Still on the schedule, they have number 18, Utah. They have where's Washington? I just saw them up here. Number 21, Washington. USC is 11th in the country. And Oregon State is 28th, just outside that top 25. So they're playing really good offenses. If you want to look at from a half glass type full perspective, they're playing some of the best offenses in the country. You're not going to be able to completely shut them down every single time like we saw against Stanford or like we saw against Eastern Washington. Now, to your guys' point, yes, the linebackers are not very good, and that is a concern. Now, I will say, I think the linebackers are really good against the run, but the problem is they don't have a lot of guys that are really good against the pass. It feels like it's Jeffrey Bossa, and that's it. And I don't even know if Jeffrey Bossa is even playing that good right now.
He's having a hard time too. Yeah.
Yeah, and going into the year, that was kind of the expectation of, hey, we can pair Bossa with Sewell, we can pair Bossa with Flo, because on paper, his skill set was going to be defending the pass. He's good against the run, but he's better against the pass, while Sewell and Flo were better against the run, not very good against the pass. And so the problem was he was really the only one that you looked at and said, hey, he's our guy in coverage at linebacker. And he's not playing at a good level either. So there isn't a lot of options. And I think you look at recruiting, you look at this may be a portal area here. You go and you hit the portal in the offseason, add 1, maybe 2 guys that are linebacker type players that can do some damage in pass protection. Because while in the SEC or in the Big Ten, there's a lot of teams that run the football effectively and do it at a high level. The Pac-12, the offenses are kind of, I don't want to say similar to the Big 12 air raid type stuff, but everyone chucks the ball around in the conference. And you need to be able to have some guys that can defend the pass at the linebacker spot. And I just don't think they don't have anybody really at that spot right now. They're good against the run, but the problem is the teams that they're playing, they don't run the football consistently. They are aired out type offenses.
And just to put it in perspective here, and I know we've argued on and off the podcast how reputable are these PFF grades. Currently, the PFF grades in coverage for Oregon's primary linebackers, Justin Flo is the worst, 38, which is just a very bad grade. Jeffrey Boss is not much better at 43. Sewell's actually considerably better than both of them at about 59.
He's been the best coverage linebacker of guys who really play.
Which is, and so you look at this and you just kind of go like, you basically, and those grades, anything under 60, it's not great by PFF standards. Like the top coverage players in Oregon's team are currently Brian Addison, he's about 82, Christian Gonzalez 75, Triquez is actually 71, Dante Manning is 71. These guys over 70, over 80, in the 75 range, that's very, very solid. That puts you in kind of the, the top 30, top 25 percentile of college football coverage players. Being in the lower range, like we're talking about, is like these are considered some of the worst coverage linebackers nationally in that range by PFF standards. So that's a point of emphasis, something to consider, something to work on. I'm curious on the player acquisition part, how much of a focus that'll be. I think we expect Noah Sewell, not to make this a long-term 2023 and beyond question, because it wasn't, but I think we all expect Noah Sewell to be gone after this year. I think Justin Flo should come back. I don't really see what he's done this season to really I think he needs to put a full season into playing at a really high level. I hope to God he plays really awesome down the stretch and gives himself a chance to go pro and be drafted high. I just think if he were to put his name out there now, I think there's some concerns. He's had some really nice moments. He's also had some moments where it hasn't been pretty. Matt, do we have time for another one? Do you want to do?
We got one more. We got time.
We were debating before the show if we were going to do 2 or 3 on the back end here. We're going to do the third from @Robbie_Parness, who is a pretty frequent question asker. This one is, what worries you more right now, a letdown game at Cal or losing Kenny Dillingham to a head coaching gig after the season? #Autzen Audibles. Did you guys watch the Cal-Washington game?
Yes. I don't know why I was, but I should have been in bed, but yes.
I came away thinking neither of those teams are all that good.
No.
And Cal offensively actually was a little bit more frisky, despite being kind of ugly while doing it. Like, they completed some pretty high degree of difficulty passes. All in all, though, really not sure I'm that concerned about losing to Cal. I think Oregon's significantly better than Cal. Cal plays Oregon really tough, though. And I think that's a thing we have to kind of discuss and kind of recognize this week. I think the expectation should be Oregon wins by a lot of points. I think they will win this game, and possibly by a lot of points. But Cal's like a team that just kind of hangs around. Like, not a lot of teams just beat the crap out of Cal. Notre Dame, Washington, decent teams. They were within a score. I think Oregon is significantly better. I think they'll win that game. I'm not expecting a letdown. I think from what we've seen so far this year, it seems like the staff is really good at keeping people kind of focused. I am definitely more concerned about the Dillingham thing, just in terms of the long-term nature of this. I don't know if he will leave. I don't know. Like, I think that's kind of getting into to crazy discussion points here of like hypothesizing if it'll happen. But the Arizona State job is open. He has ties there. The Auburn job might be open. He obviously has ties there. Those are 2 positions that are, as a head coach, worth considering, I think, especially as somebody who obviously wants to be a head coach. Here's the take I had that I texted a friend of mine, and let me know if this is crazy.
I've been waiting for this.
Could you argue?
Hear this Scopel take.
Well, could you argue Kenny Dillingham is the most valuable coaching asset on Oregon staff, including Dan Lanning?
That is a hot take. That is scorching, actually.
What do you think about that? And that's no disrespect to Dan Lanning.
Yeah.
I just think Dillingham is really, really good play caller.
Here's the one thing that eventually I was going to get to in my answer to this. I guess I'll answer it now. Kenny it looks amazing. It looks wonderful. He's only done this for a year, and I think that's the one knock on him. So, like, if you're Auburn, if you're Arizona State, it doesn't matter who you hire. But if you're Auburn, it really does matter who you hire this time around, because you totally whiffed on Harsin. If you're Auburn and you're looking at that Kenny Dillingham, I think that's the one thing that kind of gives you pause. It's like, okay, he's an offensive coordinator at Oregon. He's doing really, really well, this offense in hyperdrive. Also, it'd be kind of weird if he went there, because he's like doing really well with Auburn's former quarterback. Anyways, I think that's the one thing that kind of is a ding on Kenny's resume, and it's such a small thing. But I think that's a very interesting question, Eric, because this college football now is all about offense. And you look at some of the good hires that teams have made in the last couple of seasons and getting coaches away, like the Lincoln Rileys of the world. It's usually offense, although there has been a little bit more of a propensity to hire a defensive-minded coach like Lanning or Marcus Freeman or Brent Venables. But offense is still the name of the game. That's what's going to get somebody hired. I wouldn't all of that be surprised if Dillingham actually gets a call from an NFL team, not for a head coaching position, but like a Joe Brady offensive coordinator just shooting up through the ranks because of how good his offenses are?
I think there's a better chance that Dillingham is gone week after this season than Oregon losing to Cal. How do we define a letdown game, though? Because
Losing.
Okay, so if they went and they beat Cal like 27-14, would that be a letdown? I mean, the line opened at like 12 offshore, which is really low for what I was expecting. But if they won by 12, I think everyone would be disappointed.
The history in this series, though, is like these games are just always close.
Right.
Is my only pushback to like, would it be a letdown if they win? Like Oregon, I'm just pulling up the history here. Like the last 3 games that these teams have played have all been decided by 10 points or fewer. Oregon's won 2, they lost the one in 2020, which was just a dreadful game. Yes. And then they did drub them pretty good in 18 and 17, 16. Cal won. I'm not going to go through the entire thing here, but Cal has just a way of playing games close and muddying the game, which is maybe why you feel like Cal's defense, which isn't a world beater this year, if they want to play in the 20s, like Oregon's offense is like scoring like in the 50s, basically mid 40s to 50s now every week, and maybe it shouldn't be close, but yeah, I get your point, Matt, of like if it's a 2-score game, is that a letdown? Probably. Most people will say it is.
And Cal has only the most points they've allowed this season is 31 in a win against Arizona. So yeah, they don't allow a lot of points. They are methodical and slowing the game down, limiting the possessions. Washington, which is one of the best offenses in the country, just put up 28 in that 7-point win. So I would be more concerned about losing Dillingham. Brandon Huffman, 24/7 Sports recruiting editor, he was at the game for UCLA, and he and I were talking about him pregame, and we kind of both agreed, like, what's obviously the connection here is ASU. Like, that's what people are probably worried most about because that's the area he's from. That's the area where his wife is from. He went to school at ASU. He was a GA at ASU. They have an opening currently. And we both, though, said, like, that job will be open again in 4 or 5 years. It's always a churning job. It doesn't have any longevity. And when's the last time we've seen a coach stay at ASU beyond 6 seasons? I can't think of one.
Todd Graham wasn't Todd Graham there longer than that? I'll pull it up. Keep talking. Sorry.
But the whole point that he and I both agreed is like, you could get that job in 3 or 4 years, and why go now? Especially when they're going to be on sanctions. They're going to it's going to be a full rebuild. And so wait for the first guy to go in and kind of get things back on stable ground. And, you know, he'll probably move on at some point in the next couple of seasons. You're only 31. You can still get the job when you're 38, 37 years old. And you don't have to deal with the sanctions. You don't have to deal with the scholarship limits if there's going to be any of that. And you can just continue to build it forward. Whereas if he goes now and it doesn't work out, he's not going to land at a Power 5 head coaching job again, because he's going to have to go back to being a coordinator. And then he's probably going to have to go take a Group of 5 head coaching job to show that he's ready for a Power 5 opportunity again. So I think if I'm Kenny Dillingham, I look at my good friend and the guy in charge of the Oregon program, Dan Lanning, and look at his path and say, okay, wait for a top 15 job in the country to open up. Be the coordinator for a couple of years, even if you have to turn down a couple of head coaching jobs at Group of 5 schools or lower levels, and go. I guess the really long answer to this is I'm very confident Oregon's going to win, and they're going to look really good against Cal. And so I'm picking the other option.
I just did the coaching history at Arizona State. No, Graham was there 6 years, so there's your 6 years. And let me go back here. This is pretty wild to look through because there is some truth to this. You had Frank Kush from 1958 to 1979. That's a 20,
as we all remember.
As we
Frankie,
all
baby.
we all remember very vividly the Frank Kush era at Arizona State.
Cushionator.
I'm sure Arizona State fans absolutely do, but the three of us were not born and don't remember much about Arizona State football from there, even if we were probably. Since him, they've had nobody's lasted more than 6 years besides one guy. And we had a 4-year stint with Darryl Rogers in the early 80s. John Cooper had a couple of years in the late 80s. Larry Marmee had a couple of years in the 80s and 90s. Bruce Snyder had 8 years from 92 to 2000. Then Dirk Cutter had 5 years. Dennis Erickson had 5 years. Todd Graham had 6 years. And then Herm Edwards most recently was here for 5 years. So, yeah, you get about 5-6 years every time is kind of the thing. So if the job's open for 2023, you can probably expect it to open in 2028, Kenny.
My thing with Kenny, real quick, if he stays at Oregon and just keeps balling, and just keeps showing off, he's going to have way better offers than Arizona State.
Absolutely.
And, yes. Like, he just needs if that's what he wants to do, instead of taking a Power 5 job, or not a Power 5 job, like a Group of 5 job or a lower level school, where they're probably just going to pay you the same amount of money that Oregon's going to pay you, because as long as Oregon does well with the football program, they're going to get more money, and clearly he needs to be paid. If he waits around a couple of years, teams way above Arizona State are going to come calling. And
just to play devil's advocate, though, Jared, because I actually probably agree, but there is also the fact that, as you pointed to, I think the question now is he doesn't have a whole lot of experience as an offensive coordinator. Should he really be deserving of a head coaching job? Wouldn't there be some benefit of getting head coaching experience even at Arizona State to kind of put that on his resume before taking I think ultimately he's someone who could be I think he's someone who could ultimately be like the head coach at like Notre Dame or, you know what I mean, like a big school.
That is a big school.
I just threw a big school that, you know, you kind of.
Are you saying Marcus Freeman is on the hot seat?
Not now. I'm saying you're talking about 3 to 4 years.
Recording this?
You're saying 3 to 4 years down the line, though. 3 to 4 years down the line, maybe. I mean, it's not going great. It's been a rough start. You know, I'm just throwing out a school that like is pretty prominent that might have coaching turnover in that 3 to 4 year range. Like, could be a school.
Could be a Southern Florida school too. I don't know.
Could be.
Miami.
Well, there
Thank
you go.
Matt. Yeah. But yeah.
I don't know. That was just a thought. Just kind of like, you know, you talk about the lack of offensive coordinating, play calling experience. Maybe there's some benefit of being a play caller while also being a head coach. I mean, I think he's going to continue to be a play caller wherever he goes because that's what makes him special.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll see. He'll be fine. I promise.
He's going to make a lot of money coaching football. I guarantee that. And
he'll be good. And he's a good dude. So Kenny, if you're listening, we'd like to talk to you at one point, though. That's our one issue.
we do talk to him. We get about 8 words on Tuesday, Wednesday's practice while he walks in. Anyway, Matt, do you have one more thought before we wrap up?
Yeah, real quick. It's a yes or no answer from you guys. If you can expand on it, you want to, that's fine. Should Oregon redo his deal and give him $2 million or more to be the offensive coordinator to ensure that he's here at Oregon for the next 4 years? Call it the Dante Moore deal.
Yes. If you can guarantee he's here for 4 years, yes, absolutely. Because the thing that makes this team, and this is the reason I made the point about the most important coaching asset might be Kenny Dillingham on staff. To me, and I'm not trying to overlook everybody else, I think there's a really good staff. And I think Dan Lanning's a really good head coach. But to me, what's made this team so good is its offense. And in large part, the creativity of its offensive coordinator and play caller. And if you can keep this guy around, you should open up the pocketbook to make sure that happens. I'm not saying that if he leaves after this year, Oregon suddenly has a stinky offense and Dan Lanning has a bad tenure here. But I think the longer you have a really good offensive coordinator that is proving to be a really good offensive coordinator, the more successful you're going to be. So absolutely. And you brought up the Dante Moore of it all. That's a big time recruit that committed here in large part because of Kenny Dillingham. If Kenny Dillingham takes off, does he look around and do you lose your 5-star quarterback recruit? I think that also needs to be included in the Kenny Dillingham kind of part of the discussion here.
Yes. Pay the man.
I agree. Yes. It's time. I think it's money well spent to extend him right now and ensure that he's here for a couple more seasons. All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back later this week for another discussion and getting you ready for Cal. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.